Every time you hear the word pedophile, I think most of us think of a man, a balding man in his late 30s to 40s, probably driving around one of those weird and creepy vans. But that's not always the case. Sometimes a pedophile can be a woman or a person that you would least expect to be. And that is exactly what today's story is about. I'm going to share with you the brutal murder of a 4-year-old innocent little girl who was killed by someone that you would never expect. Due to the nature of the topic, I would recommend that you skip this video if you are sensitive to the mentions of rape, child abuse, and the murder of a child. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel where we talk about mostly Hungarian true crime cases, and my name is Tímea. And I haven't posted anything in over 2 weeks. I've been really missing filming. I hope that you had a great Christmas or any other holiday that you celebrate with your loved ones. I hope that you ate some delicious food. I for sure had a very busy past few weeks, and I wish you a very happy new year. Let's hope that 2022 brings us all the happiness and all the success that we all strive for. And even though I know that this story is going to be very heavy and depressing, I hope that I can bring at least a little bit of justice to this little girl, and I hope that you are going to watch despite being in a festive holiday mood. Now let's get started with today's story, which is going to be very sad and devastating and upsetting, and I will give timestamps if you want to skip over the graphic details. Orsos Anikó was a 4-year-old beautiful little innocent girl who had a very happy childhood by all accounts. She lived in the town of Komló and she liked doing all the things that children like to do. She spent almost all of her time playing outside in the garden of the 4-story building where she lived with her family. One day on the 15th of September 1989, her parents left her unattended for several hours and she was locked out of the apartment, so she had no choice but to play outside in the garden, which would not really be a problem for her. She liked doing that, but it is questionable how good her parents were to leave a 4-year-old child unsupervised for hours. The neighbors all reported seeing her playing happily outside up until about 4 p.m. And since 5 p.m. nobody saw her ever again. She went missing. And when her parents got home, they realized that their daughter was nowhere to be seen, so they started searching for her in the neighborhood, but to no avail. At around 8 p.m. that night, so more or less 3 hours after little Anikó was last seen, they called the police. 4 days later, so on the 19th of September, the police finally found her, though she was not alive anymore. They found her in the basement of the same building where she lived in a storage room on top of a wood pile. And at the very first sight, it became obvious that she fell victim to a brutal murder. Her body was severely mutilated. Skip over to this part if you don't want to hear the details of what happened to this poor little girl. As I said, she was found on top of a wood pile in this storage room that was actually used as a woodshed in the basement of the building. In this kind of buildings, the basement is made up of many little storage rooms that the residents of the building can use for whatever they want to, and this one in particular was used for the storage of firewood. And she was placed on top of the pile, but her body was covered with fiberboard to kind of try to cover up that she was there. Her body was completely naked and covered in blood. She had multiple stab wounds all over her body and her neck was slashed. And worst of all, the tip of her nose was chopped off. If I know right, Anikó was of Romani descent, and that matters because in some Romani cultures, they cut off the tip of a nose of an enemy who they want to take revenge on. But this theory was thrown out the window quite fast because this ritual of cutting off someone's nose was never practiced on children, and there was no way to verify that the murderer would have been Romani as well. So the police theorized that the murderer most likely watched a lot of horror movies or something like that for them to want to try out all the kinds of tortures that came to mind. But one thing is for sure, whoever did this was a local person who was familiar with the area, because the basement had been searched through by the police on multiple occasions in the days leading up to the discovery. Somebody put that body there after the police had searched through the basement, assuming that the police would never go in there again. It wasn't very long until the police finally found the murderer. It was about 1 week later that they finally questioned every single person who lived in this building, including the 25-year-old man who lived in the basement in one of these storage rooms that he used as an apartment. Now, this man always behaved so weird, like he was trying to cover up something. But the second time the police knocked on his door to question him again, he just jumped out of the basement window and ran away. But he could not have been the murderer because he had a rock-solid alibi that the police couldn't debunk. On the other hand, we cannot say the same about his girlfriend, a 36-year-old woman named Vash Eva. Eva was a disability pensioner and she had never been in any kind of employment because she was born with a serious brain damage. And she gave an alibi saying that at the time of the murder she was at her friend's house, but this friend didn't back her up. So the police started questioning her more and more, and she started contradicting herself. She came up with lies, she acted very nervous and anxious, until suddenly she just gave in and confessed to the murder of Anikó. Now, what happened and what she did to that defenseless little girl is genuinely very, very upsetting. As I mentioned before, it was a warm, sunny September day, and after a few hours of playing outside in the garden, Anikó became very thirsty. But she couldn't go home into her apartment to drink because her parents locked the door and left this little girl unsupervised. So her only choice was to knock on the door of one of her neighbors, which was going to be Eva. And they were friendly with each other, they knew each other, so the little girl trusted her. She had no reason to think that something bad was going to happen. So she entered Eva's apartment where she got a glass of water. And Eva also put on some music to listen to, and they danced and they started playing and having fun. And at first everything was nice and dandy. But Eva had some malicious intents with this little girl. Skip over this next part if you don't want to hear this because it's going to be very fucking sick. So as they were playing and dancing, Eva became aroused and she started touching herself while she was playing with this 4-year-old little girl. But that wasn't going to be enough for her, and she also started touching Anikó, who, even though she was only 4 years old, she knew that this wasn't right. She became very uncomfortable, she got hurt, and started screaming and crying. It resulted in an argument between the two, and Eva, as a reaction, slapped and beat the little girl. Now, Anikó tried to run away and escape the apartment, but Eva became panicked that she would let someone know what happened in the apartment. So she thought that the best way to handle this was to kill the little baby girl. So she took a kitchen knife and dragged her into the bathroom where she stabbed her multiple times. And in the end, she cut her throat, which was going to be the fatal injury. After that, Eva tied little Anikó's hands behind her back and wrapped her up in a blanket and put her in the linen holder or the box where they keep the bed sheet. I don't know what that's called. And fucking disgustingly, Eva just went on to live her life as if nothing happened, and a couple of hours later, she even attended the search for the little girl that she had just killed that same day. But after about 3 days, Eva decided to remove little Anikó's body from her apartment because it started decaying, of course, and that was when she decided to go down to the basement and hide her body in this woodshed because she knew that the police had already searched that room and she assumed that they wouldn't search there again. Now, during the investigation, the detectives couldn't really figure out if Eva had committed similar crimes before or any crimes at all. But if this was her first crime ever, she started out really big. What she did to this little girl is absolutely abhorrent and demented. But now the police had her confession and all this evidence against her, so she was going to go on trial. And despite her mental disability, she was deemed fit to stand trial. First of all, the defense tried to explain it away, saying that Eva was in an emotional imbalance because she had a huge fight with her boyfriend that day. And then they also said that Eva was generally sexually deprived because she didn't have enough sex with her boyfriend. And then the third excuse that they tried to use to justify what Eva did to this poor little girl is that Eva was also sexually harassed when she was 7 and 9 years old. And I am very sorry that that happened to her. This should not happen to anyone, and I am sure that this gave her a distorted idea of what sex and consent should look like. But this is not a justification to try to pass that on to another child and ruin their life too. Even if little Anikó had survived the attack, she would have been forever scarred because of what would have happened to her. She was charged and convicted for first-degree murder, and she got 18 years in prison. 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after only 14 and a half years. So the earliest this bitch was out of prison was in 2004, but she was surely released in 2007. And now this person is most likely still roaming the streets as a free person after what she had done to this little girl. People like her are walking on the street. I don't see how 18 years is a fair punishment for what she did. She took the entire life of this little girl. She murdered her brutally, completely senselessly, without any motive. And even if little Anikó had survived, the scar of having been fucking touched by that woman is traumatizing enough. That alone would have scarred her for the rest of her life. 18 years is literally nothing. She should have spent a million life sentences. And the final and most important question that we should all be asking ourselves is, how could this happen in the first place? How could we prevent such things from happening again? Because I am not justifying anything that Eva did to that little girl, and I am not saying that Anikó deserved what happened to her in any way. No. But Anikó's parents failed her big time when they left a 4-year-old little girl locked out of the apartment to play outside in the garden for several hours, unattended in the hot sun. That was mistake number one of the biggest mistakes I've ever heard in my life. And I am not blaming moms and dads who are trying their best to be a good parent, because I understand that parenting must be really hard and mistakes are going to be made and you can't always be perfect. But they deliberately let their 4-year-old toddler completely unattended for hours. And had they done their due diligence of parenting properly, and had they made sure that she was safe, supervised, not thirsty, and not hungry, this probably would have never happened, and she could have grown up to be a happy adult, and she would still be here. But this poor, defenseless little girl was failed by so many people, and I am so angry. And the last thing I want to mention is that Anikó's clothes, shoes, and the murder weapon are on display in the police museum in Budapest. If you ever wanted to visit for some reason, this is not something that I would like to see. But thank you very much for taking your time and listening to Anikó's story. I hope that I could bring her at least a tiny little bit of justice, even though I know my video doesn't really do anything. Don't forget to like this video, and it does not mean that you like what happened to Anikó. It means that you like my presentation and appreciate the effort that I put into this channel. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn on the notifications, because I have a lot of videos like this coming pretty much every week. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you a very happy 2022 filled with blessings, and I see you next time. Bye!